Hey, what's up? This is Scott with Level Up Tutorials, and in this video, we're going to be showing you how you can get MongoDB connected to your SvelteKit app. We're going to be using all the latest and greatest versions of SvelteKit, the stuff with page.server.ts so that you can connect your database, essentially to be able to pull data from your database and pass that directly in as props with no effort whatsoever. It's really great, and it's how we're doing it on the latest version of Level Up Tutorials. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create a new SvelteKit app. We're going to be doing so with npm create, and we'll say svelte at latest, and then we'll just name this Mongo. This is going to do the whole creation thing, which if you already know, you can fast forward. We're going to just do a SvelteKit demo app using TypeScript, using ESLint, using prettier, yes, playwright is no. These things don't matter, so don't get hung up on this. In fact, I probably should have created this before the video started. Either way, I just want to show you that we're starting with a purely blank project here. Here's the blank project. This is what it looks like. And everything should be very, very like blank, right? This is just the blank starter kit that comes with the latest version of Svelte. Now I'm going to go ahead and do npm install here to make sure all of our dependencies are installed before we do anything else. And then we're going to install MongoDB. Now, before we do all of this, I just want to say, if you feel the need to leave a comment saying, LOL, Mongo sucks or something, don't do it. It's just not worth it. In fact, I'll probably just delete it, to be honest. Mongo is very widely used, and while Postgres and other options are wonderful as well, there's a lot of people out there using Mongo, so zip it, okay? Let's do npm install --save MongoDB, okay? That's the command. We hit this, we hit enter. This saves MongoDB as a dependency into our project and installs it. From there, we can do npm run dev to get this thing up and running at localhost 5173, as is the new Vite starter. And as you can see, we have the lovely welcome screen. All right, let's actually get to the good stuff now. We have we have Mongo saved as a dependency. We have a SvelteKit site up and running. Here's what we're going to do. We're first going to create a new folder inside of our SRC. I'm going to name this strictly DB. It's fine to keep your database in the lib folder, but I like to have mine in its own thing, right? Because this is like very clear that this is database related stuff. You don't have to do this yourself, but I like it. Next, I'm going to have a new file inside of here. We're just going to call this mongo.ts. Now, mongo.ts is going to import Mongo client from MongoDB like this, okay? And we have Mongo client here. That's great. And next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to say const client is equal to a new Mongo client. And this is a function like this. Now, what goes inside of here? Well, what goes inside of here is actually going to be an env variable. So how do we do env variables in the latest version of SvelteKit? Well, it's actually really great due to some changes within Vite. What we can do is, you want to make sure this is in the root of your project, not inside of the source folder. You'll create a new .env file. .env is a common way to store secrets. Stuff that you might not want to commit into your code, and that way you can use different env variables without having to worry about making them insecure, having them in your code base, having them in your repository, especially if your repository ends up being public. Even if it's not public, it's probably a good idea to put all this stuff in a .env file and then not commit that .env. So we have our .env file. Let's go ahead and make a new env variable, and we'll call this Mongo URL. Mongo URL is going to be equal to a Mongo URL. Now, the standard way of doing this is to say MongoDB : //. And since we're working at a database that is hosted locally and up and running and already existing at this point, we already have a string ready for here. Now, for some reason, my computer doesn't like it when I do localhost here, so I have to do 127.0.0.1, which is the local host. Same port, 27017, because that's the default. And then my database is named Level Up, okay? Now, if you already have a database up and running, if you've already created one, You have one on Atlas. You can use the Mongo string here with username and password. If you haven't, head on over to YouTube, say how to install MongoDB, Mac OS or Windows or whatever, and how to create a database. It's kind of out of the scope of this video just because I want to focus on the SvelteKit side of things, right? So this is my MongoDB connection string. Now at this point, you might want to add this URL into your code. So how do we do that? Well, the new way of doing this inside of Vite is to import it from env static private, because this is a static and a private env variable. Static meaning that it does not change, it does not get reassigned, and private meaning that it is not revealed to the client or the browser, meaning this is only accessed server side. So we can say import Mongo URL, and then from $env/static/private. This $env is basically an alias here to say, hey, look for our env variables, and then static private. This means we don't have to do the process.env stuff that you typically would, and in fact, this is the way that it's recommended to do. So we can take this Mongo URL now and plop it directly inside of our Mongo client function. Okay, then we can create a new function. We're going to say export function start_Mongo, and start Mongo is going to look like this. We're going to maybe we'll just do a console log here just for fun. We'll say starting Mongo, and then we're going to return client.connect. So we're saying here we're creating the client, and here we're telling the client to connect. Hey, client, connect. And then the next thing we're going to do is export the client.db. So we're going to export default client.db. This does not have to be the default export, but hey, it seems like a decent default export to me, right? Export default client.db. Okay. So this is our basic Mongo file. This is the thing that we're going to be using to connect to our database. And by default, if you were to ever check out our console log, you're not going to see any connecting to Mongo because there's no reason for this file to run at this point, right? This file is not doing anything. So how does this file actually do something? And how do we get this to run once? How do we get this thing to run only when the application is starting or at any time that we actually need it? Well, believe it or not, there is a lovely file called hooks. Now, in the latest version of SvelteKit, we have access to a hooks.server.ts, and hooks.server.ts is a hooks file that runs on every request, but only runs on the server side. And this file lives inside of SRC. Now, this doesn't live anywhere by default because you'll see it doesn't even exist in here. So we can create a new file, and we'll say hooks.server.ts. Okay. Now, hooks.server.ts is, like I said, it's a file that runs on the requests and it allows you to intercept those requests. And that's how we handle things like authentication, right? We get a cookie in on the request, we check to see if it's a cached user or not. We push that data into what's called locals. But you can also use this to essentially run once. So what we're going to import in this thing is import, and we're going to say, let's import start_Mongo, and that comes to us from ./db/Mongo. Now, if we wanted to do a little detour here, here's an interesting idea. I actually end up aliasing my DB URLs to just be $DB like this. That way, anytime I need to access anything in the database folder, I have access to it nice and easily. Now, we can set up aliases really easily inside of SvelteKit just by svelte.config.js. You'll see this file here. And inside of Kit, there is an option here like alias. And alias can also be done in Vite config, but it's better in SvelteKit because that way TypeScript automatically becomes aware. So in our alias folder or alias property here, we can say db, and db is going to be equal to ./src_db. That's lovely because what this means now is that we shouldn't have to worry about this, and we can just say $db and hopefully cannot find. And I'm wondering, And it looks like after a refresh, this has changed. This is still angry about this, but I think this should run no problem. Let's actually give it a try and see if this officially runs. If it doesn't run, then we'll know we goofed something up. But this should run no problem. So what we want to do is just simply run start_Mongo like this. Now, since this function does return a promise, you could always do a .then on here, and this could console.log Mongo started, just so we have some context here. In fact, if this thing didn't work, you wouldn't get these messages. So I'm pretty sure VS Code is just lagging behind here. In fact, we could say restart TS. Hopefully that fixes it. Either way, what we have here is a two-step process, and we're now connected to Mongo. You can see it directly here in our console, starting Mongo and Mongo started. And anytime the page reloads, we're going to get that reconnection string, because that's going to happen every single time hooks.server.ts is initially reloaded, which is whenever our server is reloaded. Now, again, this is not going to run on every request, because the only thing inside of hooks.server that runs on every request is the export const handle. Okay, handle is a function that you can export from your hooks that runs on every request. So simply just by dropping this start Mongo inside of hooks.server, you can be assured that this will connect whenever the server is reloaded, and that's it. Okay. So we now have a nice little indicator that Mongo is officially connected and that we have Mongo started. At this point, if you're not seeing starting Mongo and Mongo started here, since we haven't typed in any sort of error checking onto this, you'll want to make sure that you have that. In fact, so if you're not seeing the starting Mongo and Mongo started, then there's probably an issue with your connection string. In fact, let's go ahead and see if we goof up ours, what exactly happened stars, and that way we can make sure we troubleshoot it. So I'm just intentionally sabotaging ours here to see. You can see starting Mongo just hangs. Okay, so if we were to head to, in fact, I think the best place to do this would be hooks.server.ts, where we did start Mongo.then. You could always have a catch in here to catch for any sort of error. And we could console.error the E out of here. And let's see if this gives us any grief. And you can now see we have a lovely big old error dump where it's telling us that connection timed out. So this is going to let us know, in fact, if we have an issue, which is fine. I think it even crashed my... server for some reason. But at this point, you can see that if we fix our connection string, head back here, you'll see if we get this page server reloading here, starting Mongo, Mongo started. Okay, so what's a good strategy for working with our data? So I'm not going to get too in depth with this because now at this point we have Mongo connected, but I think it's important to actually see this thing in use now that we have this connected. So what do we want to do here? Well, we want to go ahead and we'll want to create, essentially, I'm going to have a new file. We'll just call this the tutorials collection. And I'll just call it tutorials, because this is a database that already exists. So I already have collections inside of my database. This is just tutorials.ts. I'm just keeping this inside of my DB folder. Typically, I'm doing this in a much more organized manner. I'm having folders for each of my collections. I'm having all sorts of schemas and stuff like that inside of there as well. So definitely recommend in a larger project, maybe sussing out how you, maybe having those models or anything inside of their own folders and maybe a little bit more organized here. But let's go ahead, and what I want to do is I want to utilize a specific collection here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import our DB from, and then once again we can use our $DB/Mongo, and the DB can be accessed. We can get a new collection. We can say const tutorials is equal to DB collection, and the collection name is tutorials. I know this because I wrote this collection. So if you don't have a collection, you'll want to follow your MongoDB. You'll want to name this whatever you would like to name it. Mine is named tutorials. But again, this isn't a 101 here. This is more or less how to get MongoDB connected. If you'd like a full-on tutorial for building a full-on app with MongoDB, I can definitely do that in the future too. Just let me know if that's something you have interest in. So we have tutorials, const tutorials here, and we can export this. In fact, we can just export it straight like this. Export const tutorials. Beauty. Okay. Now, how do we actually use this in our SvelteKit components? Because this is where it gets kind of fun. We have our lib folder and our routes folder, and routes is where we're going to want to do our stuff. For instance, we have page.svelte here, and we have page.ts. Now, I'm going to remove the contents of page.ts. I'm going to change this file to page.server.ts. Now, the reason why page.server.ts needs to be .server is because if we're utilizing the database in SvelteKit, we need this thing to only run on the server. Okay? That's important because if you don't have this running on the server, you're going to get a bunch of errors really quickly, and that's a guaranteed way to make you frustrated. So what do we want to do from here? Well, we're going to import tutorials from db/tutorials. This is one of those reasons why that alias URL helps, because once we start to get into our routes, maybe you're nested deeply into your routes, just being able to say db makes it nice, right? So from here, we can have an export const load. Now, load gets a type of page server load, okay? And this is equal to an async function. And this could have params, it could not. In this case, it won't. Page server load, this type, this is a TypeScript type, and this can be imported as import type page server load from $./$ types like this, okay? These are generated types, so that way the data can get passed along. And if you were to have your data typed coming out of your MongoDB data, then it would actually pass those types all the way from your database all the way to the UI, which is, it's wonderful. It's the best. Okay, from here, what we can do is const, we can say const data is equal to await tutorials. Look at this, Copilot just completed it all for me. There's going to be some changes here though. We're going to say const data is equal to await tutorials find, and we're going to find all of the tutorials, and then we're going to turn it into an array. Now that's a lot of tutorials, so I'm going to add some parameters on this. We're going to say a limit, and we're going to limit it to 50, and we're also going to projection, and we're going to project title is 1. So we're going to get 50 tutorials, and we're only going to get their titles. We're going to turn them into an array, and we're going to have them as data here. Now, we're going to return this as tutorials, and tutorials is equal to data here. Now, why didn't I name this variable tutorials, by the way? The reason being is because our database collection is named tutorials. Yeah, that's not going to work, right? So I'll go with data or tutorials data and do it like this. Very, very common way of me doing this. So now at this point, this is wonderful. If you want to actually go ahead and make sure this data is coming in, we could throw in a console log on the server side here, and this would confirm that the data is coming in. And granted, if you have no tutorials or you're not using this database, which you won't be, then you're going to want to make sure whatever you're returning out of here is coming in. So I can hit refresh, and then I can head to our console, and I can see, look at this, the data's here. Perfect. And now, like I said, we can pass this data directly into our component as our data inside of props. So we have our script, and we're going to, actually, watch this. I'm going to do lang ts just so I can show you all the TypeScript goodness that I do with this. And we can say export let data. And data is going to be the type of page data. And page data, or as I have it as a shortcut as PDT, it comes from import type page data from $./$types. Okay? I have a whole bunch of snippets set up, and maybe I recommend you do, or maybe I should open source mine. So we have our data. The fastest way to pull out tutorials from data here is to do $:, parentheses, brackets, tutorials equals data, like this. It says tutorials is declared, but never, it doesn't say, does it say it doesn't exist? because page data, you can see page data should have tutorials. It's right here. However, it put it inside of props. So I think I actually goofed something up on the server. Yeah, you don't need this props right here. I don't know why. Or I was praising Copilot for doing that, but it goofed me up. Okay. So to reiterate here, sorry, we're going to return only tutorials out of here and grab the data, not props dot whatever. And I'm sorry for showing you that. And you can see, and this is if you want a textbook reason for why you use TypeScript, that's it. TypeScript just said, hey, tutorials doesn't exist inside of data. It exists as props.tutorials. Thank you, TypeScript. You saved my bacon. So tutorials now exists. And if we want to output them, we can do that directly into our component. And check this out. This is the best part about all of this. We don't need any if tutorials, blah, blah, blah. We can just do tutorials as tutorial. And then because we know that this data is going to be available, and this data is going to be available at build time here for us, or at least in the server side of things. Maybe not build time, but server side, rendering side of things. And if we head to our site, don't worry, I'll go back to that code. You can see 50 tutorial titles, bingo, bango, just like that. Cool, right? Okay, I can do this as a full-on bigger tutorial if you'd like, where we can set up CRUD operations. We can talk about some potential issues here. There's a lot of stuff. In fact, maybe that's a full-on tutorial series if you'd like. But the most important things are what? Well, we have MongoDB, and I'll also make this code available on GitHub today. So MongoDB as a file here, where we connect to our client. The client URL is pulled in from a private static env variable. We run this connection string in a hooks.server.ts file. This file is basically allows you to tap into the request cycle of the server side, but just when you have a function run in here, it runs once whenever this file is loaded, which is every time the server is restarted. So it's a good opportunity to connect to the database here. So we connect to our database by starting Mongo, and we make sure that it's started, or we catch any error that may come up. Now, there's a lot more you probably want to do in the error handling side of this, but when you're just first starting this stuff, it's just good. We also set up an alias for our database, so that way we could go ahead and make sure that we can access database at $DB each time we want to. Now, we created a collection with db.collection and then the collection name, and we exported it as a variable. And then inside of our page.server.ts file, we were then able to have a load function. Now, the load function is able to actually run a real DB query and pass that data directly into our components as data, just with a simple return. And this is an async function, right? We're just doing a simple DB find, and we're returning the data directly from the page.server.ts into page.svelte. We can access that data with data.tutorials, or you can use this reactive statement snippet here to do $: and then this whole destructuring, this destructuring to pull out tutorials from data, and then we can access that data without any sort of go off and hit an API, wait for that data to return, check to make sure that data is still here, whatever. What we're doing is we're loading up data on the server side. We're building out this page as an HTML file on the server side. And sure enough, when we have all of this information here and we check out our page source, every single one of these tutorials is going to be available to us in the server-side version of this page, wherever that code may be. In fact, this is the old version. There we go. There we go. All of the stuff ready for SEO, ready for speed. Awesome. Cool. So this is how you connect MongoDB to your new SvelteKit app. And this is using the latest SvelteKit load function stuff. This is how it works. This is how we're doing it in production. And there's a lot more here that we could explore. So if you want to see a full-on tutorial with CRUD operations for MongoDB inside of SvelteKit, let me know. If there's another database technology or an ORM, sure, we can do that too. But when you add too many things here and there, you start to run into this point where something gets out of date and the whole thing gets blown up. So I don't want to do this ORM with this DB and this whatever, but I would do a whole course on Mongo or maybe even Postgres. I'm just not a SQL master or anything like that. So check it out. As always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. Follow along at leveluptutorials.com as we really get into, we're about to launch a new version of the site. It's a new version, and let me tell you, we're doing some seriously cool stuff. And in fact, I have some really neat stuff going on too that maybe I can show sometime, where what we're doing actually, believe it or not, is we have our schema. This is a little sidebar here. We're doing our schemas in something called Zod, which allows us to write our schema once. We have our schema here, and then we tell Zod to infer the type. So it generates it infers the types for us so that we have our type of the database. And then we actually, this is actually really neat. I wrote a function that takes that Zod schema and turns it into essentially a MongoDB validation schema. So we're using MongoDB itself to validate our schemas. So I'm updating the validation schema using the schema from Zod. And then the whole time I'm able to pass in the type that's also inferred from Zod. So I never have to write a single type for my database queries. I just write one schema one time that validates the data into the database, that gives me the type, that then it can be imported client-side or server-side and is used inside of our DB collection where we have full typing on everything. It's sick. And this is how our whole site's going to be. So maybe I could do a whole tutorial on that. If you're interested in that, let me know. Who knows? All right. Well, as always, this is Scott. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and I didn't even tell you that same schema outputs a form for us. It just keeps getting better. So I'm sorry that I'm going off on this stuff. If you've gotten what you've gotten out of this, just you can stop watching now. But if you're interested in seeing this thing in action, let's go ahead and find an ID. Let's find a good one. We're importing that schema, and we're basically passing it into, using a standard form tag, we're passing it into an inputs component, and we pass in a fields prop, and it generates the whole form for us with types, only from that one time. It's awesome. So, hey, maybe I'll do something deeper on that if you're interested. You can still see I still got a bunch of red and some TypeScript stuff going on. That's it. Leveluptutorials.com, syntax.fm. We'll see you next week.